Good day, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Turning Blind Spots into Growth Signals. We'll begin in about 1 or 2 minutes as we give some others a moment to log in and get settled. While we're waiting, I'd love to make this interactive from the very start. Please take a moment to type your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. It's always helpful to see the diversity of perspectives in the room, especially since we had over 200 people RSVP for this event from about 20 different countries. So that's humbling. Look, as we get ready to begin, I want to give you three things to listen for during this session. The first thing, pay attention to where decision friction shows up in your organization, not as a strategy issue, but as a visibility issue. Second, listen for how growth constraints often hide inside everyday operations long before they appear on financial results. And thirdly, notice how leadership confidence erodes not from a lack of effort or intent, but from misaligned execution and incomplete signals. Now, this session is really grounded in the roots framework from the book The CX Lighthouse Navigating Business Growth with Customer Experience. And it's designed to give you practical clarity you can act on immediately. So, as we move through the webinar, please feel free to type your questions directly into the chat. You don't have to wait until the end. We'll address as many as we can before our time is up. And also be sure to take advantage of the resources and offers available at the end of today's presentation. They're designed to help you continue this work beyond this session. Most importantly, thank you so much for being here and for investing your time and attention. Your engagement makes this conversation meaningful and means a whole lot to us at the CX Lighthouse. We're going to begin shortly. Hey, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's dive into our presentation. Um, Before we get started, I want to give some context to this. And by the way, my name again is Roger Nicholas. I am the CEO and founder of the CX Lighthouse. And we're going to dive into a lot of great information today, but I wanted to give some context as to why this webinar and why now. Over the last couple, maybe even 3 months, I've been getting a lot of feedback that tends to end up being very consistent from leaders, whether it be in response to some of the points I make in my weekly newsletter or out of the many polls that I do with leaders to find out about strategy and where they are and where they see their business going. And one theme is really consistent. Leaders are desperately seeking clarity and preemptive insight more often than not, because based on where things are right now, they don't see things early enough that they can impact them. So the genesis of this webinar is that conversation and those conversations over the last couple of months or so. All right, so here's what you'll learn as we go through this. Why most leadership teams feel busy but not confident. How growth constraints hide inside everyday operations, where revenue becomes dependent on heroic effort instead of some intentional or systemic design. How misaligned execution quietly damages our credibility to the customer and even to the teams that we lead. Why strategy fails when operational visibility is low, even with strong intent. And then I'll share some critical leadership takeaways and diagnostic tools. All right, so I just want to share the axis of this discussion. This session is designed for business owners, executives, and senior leaders who want clearer decisions, fewer surprises, and growth that feels intentional, not accidental. So if your growth feels harder than it should, this webinar will show you why and what to do next. Now, I want to introduce a concept called the CX Disempowerment Ladder. And here's why we need to understand this concept. Business failures are really a single issue. It's a cumulative and it's often cumulative and systemic. And most organizations start with operational friction and then they climb or progress up the ladder unintentionally. But by the time leaders feel actual disempowerment, the damage is already financial. So, what looks like a strategy problem is usually a leadership visibility problem. So, that's what we're going to discuss. So, let me talk about the CX Disempowerment Ladder. So, on the ground floor of the ladder are the operational frictions. And those show up or manifest as fragmented processes across teams and across departments, uh, inconsistent customer interactions, and even uh, wasted initiatives on misaligned or wasted investments even on misaligned initiatives. But then that progresses to the next rung of the ladder, which is customer relationship weakness. Here's where we start seeing low customer retention, low repeat business. We start missing out on referral generation or getting referrals, and even missing out on advocacy opportunities as well. But then we also see that or find that customers start seeing us as replaceable, and we end up competing on price. Now, this is a scary place to be because that's directly eroding our revenue or profit margins when we take that approach. So then that now progresses to the next round, brand and reputation risk, and that manifests as inconsistent messaging versus actual experiences for both the customer and the teams that we lead. Then the worst begins, the negative word of mouth and negative online reviews, because our reputation is now on shaky ground. And then it's difficult for customers to differentiate us in the marketplace. So there's weak differentiation. The next level is the strategic blindness. And here's where we see that decisions are based mostly on assumptions as opposed to evidence based insight or even behavioral insight. And then we find ourselves being more reactive rather than proactive in our problem solving. And then we start seeing misaligned investments in our products, in our service, and in our marketing strategy. And then the final rung of the ladder is the leadership disempowerment. And it's here that we see a lack of measurable revenue impact or revenue growth. We miss a lot of innovation opportunities or opportunities to pivot. And then we find ourselves burnt out and stressed because we're constantly fighting fires. Now, I recognize that some of that may step on a few toes here. I can actually hear some butts wriggling in seats through through the internet. So if that stepped on your toe a little bit, just type ouch in the chat. Okay? Just type ouch. Why you in my business? Up to you, right? Just type ouch. So here's why leaders are actually feeling disempowered. Decisions are made with partial data. The teams optimize locally, which is fine. They're doing the best they can within their department or as a team, but not systemically. We're operating in silos. That's one of the greatest enemies to creating value and creating loyal customers and then keeping them. And then you might have some type of metric. Some of them may even be customer experience metrics. They might exist, but they don't actually guide investment or a strategic pivot. Data without a direction to go in is just data and expensive. As a matter of fact, instead of it being an asset, it's now a risk. So a strategic filter and corrective lens we'll be offering today is something called R.O.O.T.S. Now, R.O.O.T.S is a business clarity model powered by customer experience intelligence from the book the CX Lighthouse, Navigating Business Growth with Customer Experience. And the R.O.O.T.S framework is a practical executive focused system that connects customer experience directly to business growth outcomes. And so the authors of the book, who are myself and our Director of Customer Success, Dr. Solomon Akinlawa, we position customer experience not as a soft discipline or customer service or a service function, but as a strategic growth engine that leaders must integrate into their decision making and their execution. So let me kind of introduce what R.O.O.T.S is very quickly. Um, Here's a testimonial from an executive who is leading expansion in Indonesia. The standout feature of the book is the R.O.O.T.S framework, a well structured approach that demystifies how customer experience directly feeds into revenue, operations, opportunities, tactics, and strategy. Each chapter builds on the last with practical exercises and relevant case studies, helping leaders reflect on patterns and experiences that they've had in the past. All right, so you can read that and many other reviews on the book on Amazon. All right, but here's what the R.O.O.T.S framework actually fixes. It aligns customer experience to financial outcomes, operational decisions, and strategic trade-offs. So the core promise of the R.O.O.T.S framework is that it turns experience signals or customer signals into executive grade intelligence, preemptive insight. And the framework is built for leaders who want to diagnose what's truly holding growth back and then align their teams around a shared understanding of the goal and the customer journey, and then turn those CX insights, those customer signals, into measurable business outcomes and not guesswork. So here's a summary of the R.O.O.T.S framework. At its core, R.O.O.T.S breaks customer experience driven growth into 5 interconnected areas. Revenue drivers is where we understand how customer defined value translates into repeatable profit. Operational drivers, this is where we identify and then remove and fix any friction that frustrates customers and the teams that support customers. Thirdly is opportunity drivers. This is where we spot any unmet demand and any strategic white space that we may have missed and even our competition may have missed. And then with tactical drivers, this is where we identify immediate actions that build momentum and credibility in the short term. And then finally, strategic drivers. This is where we shape sustainable growth direction with clarity and evidence at scale. So what we would have proven at the tactical level in a small sample size, once we tweak it to the way we want it, we can then scale it. But we're doing that with evidence, knowing how things are going to work out. So if we were to map the CX Disempowerment Ladder to R.O.O.T.S, here's what it would look like. When we're looking to reduce our operational friction, we would do that in the operational driver pillar of the R.O.O.T.S framework. When we're looking to reduce customer relationship weakness, we focus on the revenue drivers. When we're looking to improve our brand reputation, we're looking at the tactical drivers. When we're looking to reduce our strategic blindness, that's where we're using customer and even employee-based evidence, behavioral evidence, to inform our strategy. So instead of more guessing, there's more knowing of how things are going to work out. And then to reduce leadership disempowerment, that's where we'll identify opportunities throughout our process that we've been missing that can add revenue or efficiency. So disempowerment is not a leadership failure. I want to make this clear. Disempowerment is not a leadership failure. It's actually a framework failure. So let's look at correcting blind spots using R.O.O.T.S. To fix customer relationship weakness, we're focusing on revenue. And the blind spots we'll identify is Where's retention being discussed and not modeled? As in, what does it take to create a customer who stays, who buys more? Then referrals. We get to identify the blind spot of where referrals are being treated as luck. And then we also get to identify where loyalty is assumed but not validated or defined. And here's what I mean by that. We assume because they bought and that they're satisfied with their purchase, that they're loyal. Satisfaction has already been proven scientifically that it is not equal to loyalty. So we don't want to bet on that. And so we need to validate what loyalty looks like in our business model because it's different for every company. Because what works for Amazon doesn't work for your business. Not in the same way, because you don't have the same resources or capacity to execute. Um, and so we need to also define it because that may be an opportunity for growth. Because here's the roots correction. We have to acknowledge that revenue is downstream of what customers and employees experience, how we build and achieve trust with our customers and employees, and are they achieving their goals? If we don't hit those milestones upstream, the sooner we can hit those upstream is the better we can enjoy the revenue downstream. And customer experience reveals why customers stay, why they leave, or why they advocate for us. And by advocate, I mean, do they talk about us positively in social media or in testimonials or even in customer service calls? And is it so strong, so compelling that they're willing to refer us to other new customers at low or no cost to us? All right. So we experience a leadership shift. We go from how do we sell more to what experience exactly earns the next purchase, more loyalty, an upsell or a cross sell, and even referrals. That's a very different lens. That's a very different focus. If you agree that's a different strategy from what you might be doing right now, type, yeah, that's different in the chat. Okay, let's move on. So now we're looking at eliminating the operational friction, focusing on the operational pillar. And so the blind spots that we identify here is where handoffs are fragmented, where there's inconsistent customer interactions, where customers are hearing one thing from a person and then hearing a different thing from another person within the same organization. Or maybe they're experiencing one thing at one location and then having a totally different experience at other locations. That inconsistent customer interaction. And then here's where we identify waste disguised as activity. When we have better clarity, we tend to be efficient where efficiency makes sense for us and the customer, um, and not waste resources, whether that be time or money. So the leadership, so the roots correction becomes the operations must reflect the customer's effort and not just internal convenience. And then customer experience exposes friction leaders usually don't see. So it's more, you get some more preemptive insight so that you can act and pivot sooner, which is the superpower we all want. We want some predictive capability. And you might hear this theme repeated throughout the rest of this talk, right? So the leadership shift goes from our processes are efficient to our processes are trusted or they're actually being avoided by either customers or employees. So when we move on to ending leadership disempowerment, this is where we focus on the opportunities pillar. And the blind spots we identify here is any missed innovation due to some assumptions that we had in the past. Because here's where leaders find themselves firefighting. This is where the stress and burnout begins because we're constantly going after all these little noises all over the place, as opposed to evidence-based innovations. And then growth initiatives feel risky, and they feel risky because we're not working with enough preemptive evidence, preemptive insight. So the roots correction is customer experience identifies any latent demand or unmet needs that we may have missed or that the industry might have missed, and then the opportunity becomes testable, not speculative. So now when we know on a small scale that, you know what, this might be this might be a change. If we change this and the customer responds positively, what could that mean for us in revenue or cost efficiencies? We should be able to test that before we scale it. Because if we could make a $10,000 investment to be sure to test versus a $100,000 or $1 million investment that flops, we're probably going to choose the $10,000 investment to be sure. So our leadership shift goes from we can't afford to experiment to we can't afford to guess. I hope that makes sense. If that makes sense, then no more guessing. Type no more guessing in the chat. As we move on to the tactical pillar, here's where we get to reduce our brand and reputation risk because we're moving things in the short term. Got to address that quickly. And the blind spots we identify where our brand promise isn't equal to the lived experience of our customers or our employees. Now, let me tell you why that's important. The science of customer experience shows us that when customers are unhappy, only 1 out of 26 customers actually file a complaint when they're unhappy. So we only find out from 1 out of 26 people that something's wrong. Not only that, half of those who are unhappy tend to tell anywhere from 9 to 16 people not to do business with you. So if our brand promise isn't equal to the lived experience, that's the fallout that we can't measure because we don't have the insight. It may not even be something we're measuring. I hope that makes you uncomfortable because that's the intent. The other blind spot is where reviews surprise leadership. Yes, customers are satisfied with the product, but satisfaction is not equal to loyalty. So when we ask a survey question, would you recommend us to friends or colleagues? And it comes back, nah, maybe. That shouldn't surprise us. If it surprises us, that's a gap on our part. And then messaging, where messaging outpaces delivery. We may say our product does this, but does it actually do that? Because where messaging outpaces delivery is a huge gap and opportunity for customers to go rogue, as in defect, as in churn to your competitors, and for your best and brightest teammates or team members to not feel confident in the product that they're representing. So this is critical. So the roots correction here is tactics must reinforce our credibility, and customer experience then reveals where trust is earned or where it's broken. That gives us the opportunity to address it as quickly as possible. So our leadership shift goes from marketing drives perception, what we put out is what people actually believe, to experience validates belief, belief from our customers and belief from our team members. And then finally, the S, strategy, the strategic pillar. Here's where we escape strategic blindness. And the blind spots we identify here is strategies built on averages and siloed definitions. Here's where we figure out throughout our entire process where the gaps are that could be creating systemic drag on revenue and profit. It's also where we identify investments that are misaligned to operational or customer behavioral realities. And then it also identifies if we're using validated insight or replacing validated insight with intuition and assumptions and intelligent feelings from our team leads or leadership team. So here's the roots correction. Strategy must be grounded in behavioral evidence and a shared definition of what it takes to get to the goal that we want as a team, as a corporation, as a business. Everyone must have the same shared definition for this to work ideally. Customer experience provide the early warning signals or the preemptive insights before revenue loss or significantly sooner than currently. Right? So the leadership shift goes from we think this will work to here's why we know this will work. So one of the takeaways we want you to get from this is that customer experience is a leadership operating system. It doesn't just measure satisfaction and loyalty. It allows leaders like yourself to see the blind spots many leaders miss. And when businesses aggregate these customer signals from customer behavior, customer expectations, employee behavior, employee expectations, and any friction points, something powerful happens. Hidden revenue opportunities begin to emerge. And then leaders can transform these signal insights, these preemptive signal insights, into systems that consistently produce the business outcomes that they really want. So the key takeaway is customer experience is not a department, it's not customer service, it's not just saying thank you at the end of each call or each interaction. It's actually a powerful amplifier uh, to strategic capacity that allows you to detect and correct blind spots. And then our R.O.O.T.S framework simply uses customer experience and turns it into a decision infrastructure, a simplified decision infrastructure. One of the things we've identified, one of the reasons we wrote this book was that we found that while customer experience has been sexy for about 30 years now, it still hasn't picked up as much traction because too many books, consultants speak at enterprise big budget levels that kind of leave people behind in terms of what to do next. We wanted to provide a lens and a framework that allowed everyone, regardless of size of business, to begin. If you're very, very small, if you're a solopreneur, you could at least add these foundational perspectives and approaches to your business early so that when you're scaling, it's easy to just scale the system. And for those who are bigger, it allows them to simplify so they can take action. Because when we're confused, we don't take action. We should know that, right? So here's what changes when you use customer experience as a leadership operating system and when you apply R.O.O.T.S on top of that. Leaders regain clarity, investments align to outcomes, and your teams move less in silos and more in the same direction. If you're up for your team moving in the same direction, type in the chat synergy. Now here's what happens when R.O.O.T.S is missing. Organizations don't fail loudly or immediately. They quietly drift because decisions are made with good intent but incomplete visibility. And then leadership energy is consumed by managing symptoms rather than shaping outcomes. Over time, effort replaces design, urgency replaces priority, and then confidence is maintained through heroic activity instead of evidence. So, what looks like resilience on the surface is often the quiet normalization of risk in your business and drag on your revenue and profit. So, by the time leaders feel disempowered, the underlying constraints have already compounded across revenue, across operations, and across strategy. So, the key takeaway from the CX Disempowerment Ladder, they are: disempowerment is predictable. Risk compounds quietly across multiple phases, and then growth stalls without explanation. So, question for you leaders, and this meant to make you uncomfortable. Which rung of the CX disempowerment ladder are you currently operating on? And what is it costing you? Type the answer in the chat. If you feel there are multiple rungs on the ladder that you're operating in, type that in the chat. If you feel there are multiple places that it's costing you, type that in the chat. But just don't put all your business out there. Okay. All right. So here's some actions you can take immediately as we get ready to wrap up. Get your copy of the CX Lighthouse Navigating Business Growth with Customer Experience. It will be an essential playbook for you and your leadership team and your middle managers. And then take the R.O.O.T.S business clarity diagnostic that I'm going to share here in a second. Now, I want to share a little bit about the CX Lighthouse before we get to those tools that you get to just use a QR code and scan them. Here's what we do best. We're about enhancing leadership capacity and scaling businesses. We help growth-minded leaders unlock sustainable business growth by combining the science of behavioral science with the science of customer experience. All right, so here's why you should work with us when the opportunity arises. Because growth bottlenecks are often internal, not external. It's hidden fears, it's blind spots, it's hesitation of some kind. Also, because scaling via customer experience allows leaders to unlock growth without proportionately increasing cost. Many businesses operate on just new customer acquisition alone. But we're talking about a better customer acquisition mix strategy or strategy mix, right? Leveraging loyal customers in addition to new customer acquisition strategies. And because a leader who is visible, who is confident, and who is fluent in customer signals could steer their business toward exponential growth versus just incremental expansion. And here's how we do that. We offer a unified leadership intelligence system that includes leadership readiness intelligence, customer reality intelligence, predictive decision intelligence, where you get to test things that look like they're working before you invest deep, and then execution intelligence, where you're looking at all your systems aggregately to identify where the gaps are in handoffs, where the gaps are in customer retention and loyalty. All right, so your first tool for you, the CX Lighthouse, Navigating Business Growth with Customer Experience. You can find it on Amazon. It's again by me, myself, Roger Nicholas, and Dr. Solomon Akinloa. Just use the QR code right here, and it'll take you right there directly. So you can purchase either a digital version or paperback. I'll give you a couple more seconds to do that if you like. All right. And next, the next tool for you is our R.O.O.T.S Business Clarity Diagnostic. Now, this is a short diagnostic, and it helps leaders like yourself identify where growth constraints and visibility gaps are forming, often before they appear in revenue, retention, or reputation. So just scan the blue QR code here. It'll take you directly to that, and you can begin the diagnostic right away and have immediate feedback after you complete it in 5 minutes. All right, so take the time to do that. I'll hang on a few seconds more while you scan that and take that thing. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the presentation portion. I'm ready and excited to get into some questions. So I know I've been seeing a lot of questions being typed into the chat, um, and we'll try to get to as many of these as possible. And even if the presentation part of it is done, I'll stick around for another 5 minutes after it's done so that I can take and answer those questions in the chat. Okay, so looking forward to your questions and looking forward to questions that challenge me as well. All right, hopefully this has been really value adding for you, and let us know in the chat if this added real value to you. You know what, let's do this in the interim while people are getting their questions ready. I'll share a few questions we typically hear from leadership teams, and I'd encourage you to react to them or even build on these in the chat with your questions. The first question we typically hear is, let me see here, how do I know if our growth problem is strategy or execution? Well, the short answer, most problems are execution signals, not necessarily strategy failures. But if I answer that question through the R.O.O.T.S lens, revenue, plateaus when outcomes depend on heroic effort instead of intentional design. Operations tend to absorb friction that the leaders often don't see or no longer see. And then opportunities are missed because insights arrive too late. Things have already hit the P&L, or it's now 2 months after the genesis of the root cause of the problem that we're having, of the problem we're now seeing. Tactics tend to drift without shared intent, and then strategies fail when operational visibility is partial, even if the direction is sound. So if execution feels kind of heavy and the results feel unpredictable, the issue is usually operational visibility, not intent. A second question we tend to hear from leadership teams is, why does the leadership team feel busy but not so confident? The short answer, and this might step on a few toes, because activity has replaced clarity. But in Roots terms, leaders are reacting to operational noise instead of the outcome signals that we discussed earlier. And then decisions are made downstream where the effort is highest, but the leverage to change the outcome is lowest, right? So the confidence kind of erodes when leaders can't clearly connect actions to results. So that's why we were talking about what we were talking about. Business increases when revenue depends on effort, but operations lacks feedback loops, and when strategy is forced to compensate for blind spots. So confidence only returns when leaders regain a line of sight across the roots lens, and they don't need more dashboards. I think many leaders are really tired by dashboards that don't offer them the opportunity to take action because it's more convoluting than it is directive or didactic. The third question we often hear from leaders is, where do blind spots typically show up first? And this is probably the most popular question, right? One of you probably had it. And the short answer is, they show up where leaders stop asking questions because they think things appear to be working. But common early indicators across routes shows us that when we look through the revenue lens, discounts, exceptions, and customer defection or churn get explained away. And through the operations lens, workarounds become normalized, but it's also normalized risk. Then via opportunities lens, customer signals are absorbed as though they're anecdotal but not systemic. And then from the tactical lens, the teams execute without understanding why they execute because they don't have a shared definition of what it takes to get to the goal that we're all getting to. And then the strategic lens shows us where leadership debates direction instead of relying on evidence. So, people's very intelligent feelings tend to guide where we go as opposed to using evidence, right? Customer-based, customer behavioral, and employee behavioral evidence. So blind spots don't announce themselves as problems. They actually appear as comfort. All right, so let's tackle some of these questions here. Let's take the next few minutes to tackle some of these questions here, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and engagement today. I know how valuable your attention is, and I really appreciate you choosing to spend it here. If today's session surfaced questions, friction, or just even moments of acknowledgement or recognition, that's the intention. It's really meant to make you uncomfortable with what's happening right now. Clarity often begins by seeing what has been operating just below the surface. Before you sign off, I strongly encourage you to take the Roots Business Clarity Diagnostic. You should see the blue QR code on the screen now. The diagnostic is designed to help you quickly identify where visibility is strong, but also where there are hidden constraints that may be limiting growth across revenue, across operations, across opportunities, across tactics, and across strategy. It only takes a few minutes, but the immediate output you receive gives you a grounded starting point for better decisions, fewer surprises, and more intentional growth. As a reminder, attendees also have access to the resources and offers shared here on our website at www.thecxlighthouse.com. So please take advantage of those while they're available. Thank you again for your participation, your energy, your questions, and your openness. I truly appreciate the work you are doing as leaders, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you one on one where necessary. So have a great day and go win.